Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. The sun was setting over Charleston, casting an orange glow on the streets that seemed to mask the simmering tension in the city. At the Central Police Station, the apparent calm hid an electric atmosphere. The walls, covered with photos of former officers and trophies, seemed almost to be holding their breath, as if they knew something dramatic was about to happen. In the main office, Colonel Samantha Whitmore, a commanding and respected woman, was reviewing files. Her piercing gaze and impeccable demeanor commanded respect. She was known for her rigor. Every protocol, every rule had to be followed to the last detail. Even the most experienced officers trembled at the thought of contradicting her. A few meters away, Jason Turner, 32, a promising but impulsive officer, entered the office with a file under his arm. His colleagues knew Jason had a fiery temper, but his loyalty and courage had always earned him a certain leniency. "Colonel Whitmore," he said, his voice firm but tinged with frustration. "I need clarification on the order you gave this morning. It's unrealistic." Samantha looked up, staring at Jason with icy coldness. "Orders come from the top, Turner. I don't argue with their accuracy. You execute, period." The tension rose instantly. Jason felt his blood boil. A dull anger, built up over months of resentment, erupted within him. He took a step forward, and with a thoughtless gesture, his gun slid out of its holster. Samantha's eyes widened, but her face remained impassive, almost defiant. "Jason, put your weapon down," a colleague yelled, while others froze in disbelief. Silence fell over the office like a leaden blanket. Each second seemed to last an eternity. And in that suspended moment, Jason realized too late the magnitude of his action. The surveillance cameras, which recorded every movement, captured the image of an officer who had just crossed the red line. In less than a few minutes, his career, his reputation, and his professional life would be destroyed forever. Samantha, without blinking, took a deep breath, knowing that this moment would mark not only Jason, but the entire police hierarchy. The police station was no longer just a workplace, it had just become the scene of an incident that would make headlines and fuel debate for weeks. The police station hallway echoed with the sound of hurried footsteps and the beeping of portable radios. Jason Turner trudged forward, his backrest clutched to his chest, every muscle in his body tense with adrenaline. He knew what he was about to do was risky, but he couldn't hold back his frustration any longer. "Colonel Whitmore, we need to talk," he announced as he entered the office, his voice vibrating with suppressed anger. Samantha, her hands clasped on her desk, looked up from her documents. Her neutral expression contrasted with Jason's agitation. "Speak, Turner. But be brief. I have other urgent matters to attend to." Jason slammed the file down on the table, a soft, sharp thud echoing through the office. "That order you gave me this morning, it's impossible. It endangers the team and violates security protocols. You can't expect me to carry it out." Samantha sighed, slightly annoyed by the tone she knew all too well. "Turner, you have received your instructions. You know the procedure. I am not here to debate your personal opinions." But Jason, overcome with emotion, took a step closer to her, his fists clenching involuntarily. "You don't understand. We can't take this risk. And you know it." Silence fell for a few seconds. Then, with a thoughtless gesture, Jason slid his hand toward his weapon. The cold metal rose between them, an instant symbol of rupture and danger. Samantha didn't back down. Her gaze hardened, defiant. "Jason, put down your weapon, now." In the hallway, a few officers stopped their work, listening to the confrontation in horror. Marcus Lee, a longtime officer and close colleague of Jason, ran to the door. "Jason, stop. This isn't you. You're going to ruin everything." But Jason, blinded by anger and accumulated frustration, didn't yet realize the extent of his actions. The office had just become a field of tension where one mistake would be enough to destroy his career. And in that split second, Jason Turner's destiny would change. The silence in the office was deafening. Every breath seemed heavy, every heartbeat echoed through the room. Jason, his finger on the trigger, felt adrenaline coursing through his veins. He hadn't yet realized that this gesture would forever change his life. Samantha Whitmore stood motionless behind her desk, crossing her arms and staring at Jason with icy intensity. "Jason Turner, lower your weapon immediately. This is your final warning." Her voice wasn't shaking, but the tension in the air was palpable. Jason hesitated. His gaze was lost between anger and fear. In a moment of frightening clarity, he understood that everything could change in a second. But accumulated frustration, past humiliations, and the injustices he felt had won out over reason. I can't do this, not again," he whispered, his voice betraying his inner conflict. In the hallway, officers watched paralyzed through the glass. Marcus Lee yelled, "Jason! You're going to lose everything. Put down your weapon." A metallic clang echoed as Jason took another step forward, his gun pointed directly at Samantha. Time seemed to stand still. Each second stretched, each breath held in place. Samantha, still calm, said sharply, "Jason, you've just crossed the line. One mistake and everything will fall apart for you." Just then, a dull thud sounded behind Jason. Marcus lunged forward and grabbed his arm, disarming the officer in a split second. The weapon fell to the ground with a metallic clatter that shattered the silence, and the other officers immediately rushed to bring the situation under control. Jason stepped back, his face ashen, as the reality of his actions hit him hard. Security cameras had recorded every second. Witnesses were shocked. And in that room, only one thing was certain: his career had collapsed in an instant. Samantha slowly caught her breath, showing no fear, but her eyes reflected the gravity of the incident. She knew that this impulsive act was not only a violation of the rules, but a point of no return for Jason Turner. The commotion erupted in the office like a contained explosion. The officers present rushed forward, some shouting orders, others trying to disarm Jason. The metallic clatter of the weapon hitting the floor echoed like a death knell through the silent corridor. Marcus Lee, Jason's closest colleague and an experienced officer, was the first to intervene. He grabbed Jason firmly by the shoulders, forcing him back toward a wall. "Jason! Listen to me. You just lost everything, put down your weapon and breathe." Jason, his face trembling, finally let go, letting his hands fall to his sides. His eyes scanned the room, staring at Samantha, motionless behind her desk. Anger and fear mingled with a deep sense of regret. Meanwhile, other officers surrounded Jason, keeping him at a distance and making sure he could no longer access his weapon. The sound of handheld radios echoed through the corridor. The alarm had been sounded. Samantha Whitmore, still straight and impassive, took a deep breath. "No one is to touch this incident. Call command immediately," she ordered in a calm but firm voice. Her eyes never left Jason. Every move he made was being watched, noted, and recorded by the security cameras. Outside the office, witnesses were gathering, colleagues, civilians, and alert officers. Whispers and worried looks circulated quickly. "He pointed his gun at her," one said. "I can't believe this happened here," another murmured. The station chief arrived a few minutes later, his expression cold, immediately recognizing the seriousness of the situation. "Jason Turner, you are suspended immediately. We will initiate an immediate disciplinary investigation." Jason felt his world crumble. The suspension was the first act in a long series of consequences he hadn't anticipated. His colleagues looked at him with a mixture of pity and dismay. Samantha, meanwhile, regained her legendary composure, aware that this incident would forever mark everyone's reputation. In the corridors, surveillance cameras recorded the entire event. A few seconds were enough to transform a promising officer into an example of irreparable harm, and the story would soon spread through the media and within the hierarchy. No sooner had Jason been subdued than the station chief made a firm decision. "Jason Turner, you are suspended from duty immediately. Take him to the temporary holding room." Jason felt his heart stop. He knew the impulsive gesture couldn't be ignored, but hearing the words spoken aloud hit him like a sledgehammer. His hands trembled slightly as he followed Marcus toward the station's small cell, while the other officers watched, some shaking their heads, others murmuring among themselves. Samantha Whitmore, who remained in the office, calmly wrote a report. Every word she wrote sealed Jason's professional future a little more. She knew the severity of the incident wasn't limited to a suspension, he would lose his career, and his name would be associated with an irreparable act. In the cell, Jason sat on the metal bench, his head in his hands. The seconds seemed to last for hours. Marcus sat beside him, trying to find the right words. "Jason, you've crossed the line. You know that, don't you?" Jason nodded without answering, unable to formulate anything. Shame and fear mingled with anger at himself. Moments later, the station phone rang. Command wanted to speak to Jason personally. The deputy station commander was standing in the doorway. "Turner, command requires your presence for immediate questioning. Prepare to face all consequences." Jason stood slowly, feeling every step like a condemnation. Outside the cell, the station was returning to activity, but a palpable tension persisted. The whispers and stares of his colleagues constantly reminded him of the magnitude of his mistake. Samantha, still at the office, was already receiving calls from the command and the municipal police. Her professionalism and composure were praised, and it was clear that she would emerge stronger from this event. For Jason, however, the immediate punishment was only the beginning. His career, his ambitions, and his reputation had just collapsed in a matter of seconds. And in the oppressive silence of the cell, he understood that he had just crossed a line from which he could never return. No sooner had the incident been brought under control than information began to leak out. Surveillance cameras, the phones of colleagues, and witnesses captured the precise moment Jason Turner pointed his gun at Samantha Whitmore. Within hours, the news spread across social media and local media. The newspaper headlines were unequivocal. An officer points his gun at his superior, immediate suspension. Incident at the central station, a thoughtless action endangers security. In the newsrooms, journalists argued over the images and details, some emphasizing the explosiveness of the event, others the exemplary reaction of Colonel Whitmore. Jason, confined to his temporary cell, could hear the notifications on his personal phone. The messages poured in, calls from worried relatives, stunned friends, and strangers already sharing harsh opinions about his actions. Each alert made him feel as if his world was crumbling a little further. Meanwhile, Samantha Whitmore was receiving praise for her handling of the situation. Interviews described her as calm, courageous, and professional, able to master a potentially deadly moment without losing her composure. Jason's colleagues, meanwhile, found themselves caught up in the media turmoil. Some were being interviewed by reporters, others preferred to remain silent. Marcus Lee, the colleague who had disarmed Jason, watched the scene with a mixture of relief and sadness. "This was avoidable, all of this was avoidable," he murmured. Outside, the public was also reacting, discussions in cafes, on social media, debates on police discipline and security. Jason Turner was no longer just an officer, he had become a symbol of impulsiveness and danger. And as the media exaggerated every detail, Jason realized the incident wouldn't stay confined to the police station. His career was over, and the reputation he'd built over years would be destroyed in a matter of hours. The press had seized on the story, and with it, the entire city's judgment. Alone in the small cell of the police station, Jason Turner slumped onto the metal bench. The silence around him seemed deafening, almost unreal. Every sound coming from the corridor, footsteps, radio beeps, whispers, reminded him of the magnitude of his mistake. He thought back to the exact moment he'd pointed the gun at Samantha Whitmore. The fear that had paralyzed him, the anger he'd let guide his hands, it all seemed senseless now. The weight of responsibility was crashing down on him with crushing force. "What did I do?" he muttered to himself, his voice choked with regret. His thoughts swirled, reliving every second of the confrontation, the shocked looks of his colleagues, Samantha's impassive face, the metallic clatter of his weapon hitting the ground. He remembered Marcus Lee's warnings, his colleague's voice yelling down the hall, and suddenly the magnitude of his actions hit him hard. In a matter of seconds, he had not only endangered his own life, but also compromised the safety of his team and his superior. Jason realized that his impulsiveness, pent-up resentment, and inability to control his emotions had caused an irreversible rupture. He also understood that the immediate, though brutal, punishment was justified. His career, ambitions, and reputation were now tarnished. For the first time, he began to consider what would come after this crisis: his family's reaction, his friends' perceptions, and the entire city's judgment. Each thought brought a fresh dose of guilt and shame. Sitting in silence, he took a deep breath and whispered, "I have to face the consequences. I have no choice." In that moment of painful lucidity, Jason began to understand that this impulsive act was more than just an incident, it was the tipping point that would redefine his life forever. The next morning, Jason Turner was led into a courtroom at the police station, which had been converted into an internal tribunal. The cold, white walls, the rows of chairs, and the heavy silence made the atmosphere oppressive. At the back of the room, the disciplinary council sat, senior officers and representatives of the command, all staring at him with a mixture of gravity and intransigence. The council's chairman, Colonel Richard Hayes, a police veteran known for his rigor, spoke. "Officer Turner, you are here to answer for your actions. Pointing a gun at your superior officer is a serious violation of the Code of Conduct and Public Safety. You will have the opportunity to speak, but please know that your professional future is at stake." Jason, sitting on the central bench, felt his hands tremble. Every glance fixed on him seemed to weigh a ton. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice trembling slightly. I deeply regret what I did. I acted impulsively, in a fit of anger, and I now understand that I endangered not only my career, but also my colleagues and my superior." The council members exchanged glances. Some nodded in mild empathy, others remained impassive, firm in their judgment. Samantha Whitmore, present in the room, observed Jason calmly but determinedly. Her presence reinforced the gravity of the moment. The board reviewed security camera footage, testimonies from colleagues, and incident reports. Every detail seemed to reinforce the inevitable decision. After several hours of deliberation, the president of the council spoke. "Officer Turner, after a thorough review of your behavior, the impact on the position, and the risks involved, the board has decided upon your immediate and permanent dismissal from the police force. This decision is effective immediately." Shock hit Jason like a bolt of lightning. The weight of reality hit him: his career, his professional identity, and his reputation were now destroyed. Samantha, despite the tension, stepped forward and said in a firm but measured voice, "This incident is a stark reminder of the importance of self-control. I hope you learn a lesson from this experience, Jason. But for now, you must accept the consequences of your actions." Jason nodded silently, unable to speak. The verdict was in. The world he knew had vanished, and now he had to face the reality of an uncertain future marked by shame and regret. Walking out of the police station for the last time as an officer, Jason Turner felt a mixture of shame, anger, and sadness wash over him. The cameras, the stares of his colleagues, and the judgment of the disciplinary board weighed heavily on his shoulders. Every step he took seemed to bring him closer to a world he no longer recognized. At home, the situation was no simpler. His family, stunned by the media-covered events, expressed both concern and disappointment. His mother, Linda Turner, shook her head as she looked at him. "Jason, I knew you were impulsive sometimes, but I never imagined you would come to this. Your career is over. How do you plan to get back on your feet?" Jason looked down, unable to respond. Even his close friends, who had always admired his courage and commitment, were silent or distant. Some sent messages of support, but others no longer dared to look him directly in the eye. Social media, meanwhile, continued to broadcast images of the incident. Jason, in spite of himself, became an example of uncontrolled anger and impulsiveness. Every day, he received notifications, messages, newspaper articles, and videos alluding to his actions. The social and media pressure continued to grow. Alone in his room, he sat on the bed, face in his hands, thinking over every decision that had led him to this point. The career he had worked so hard to build had collapsed in a split second. He realized that the life he knew, colleagues, friends, professional respect, no longer existed. Marcus Lee, his friend and colleague, came to see him a few days later. He placed a hand on his shoulder and said simply, "Jason, this isn't the end of everything. You have to accept what happened and learn from it. Otherwise, you'll never get back up." Jason nodded slowly. He understood that his life had changed forever, and that every future choice would be scrutinized in light of this incident. Shame, guilt, and personal consequences were now his constant companions. But deep down, he was beginning to see a glimmer of hope, that rebuilding was possible, slow and painful, but necessary to survive the fall. The following weeks were a nightmare for Jason Turner. Every morning, he woke with the image of his actions etched in his memory, the pointed gun, the fixed stares, the metallic clang. Shame was ever present, and the city's gaze seemed to weigh on him with every step he took outside. Walking alone in a park, he reflected at length on what had led him to that fateful moment. He thought back to the months of accumulated frustration at work, the unresolved tensions with his superiors, and the small humiliations that, added together, had exploded in the worst possible way. Marcus Lee, a loyal friend and former colleague, came to him to help him put his emotions into words. "Jason, you have to understand something," Marcus said, his voice firm but compassionate. "What happened can't be undone. But what you can control now is how you react to this situation. You can either sink or learn. That's your only option." Jason nodded slowly. He understood that this experience, as painful as it was, had a teaching value. Self-control is crucial, and unchecked impulses can ruin a life in seconds. He realized that pride and anger were never worth the price of losing everything he had built. He spent hours writing, thinking, and analyzing his mistakes. Every memory of the incident became a lesson, about discipline, about respect, about the irreversible consequences of impulsive actions. Little by little, Jason began to accept that his fall was final, but that his personal reconstruction remained possible. Samantha Whitmore, although she didn't intervene directly, became an example of self-control and professionalism for him. Jason understood that strength didn't lie in violence or impulsiveness, but in calmness and the ability to remain in control of oneself, even in the most critical situations. For the first time since the incident, Jason felt a slight sense of relief. The lesson was difficult, painful, and irreversible, but it could serve as a guide to rebuilding his life. He knew he had to change, not to erase the past, but to never repeat the same mistakes. A few months had passed since the incident. Jason Turner was no longer a police officer. His hard-won career was now behind him. But as time passed, he began to accept reality and seek a new path. He enrolled in training and vocational rehabilitation programs, determined to transform his anger and impulsiveness into a constructive force. Every day was a challenge, but also an opportunity to prove he could change. Past failures now served as lessons, and he learned to channel his emotions rather than let them control him. His family, though still disappointed, began to reach out to him again. Marcus Lee stayed by his side, helping him regain his self-confidence. And little by little, Jason rebuilt his life, not as a police officer, but as someone aware of the fragility of his choices and the power of his decisions. For her part, Samantha Whitmore continued her career with determination. The incident, although distressing at the time, strengthened her authority and reputation. Her ability to manage the crisis without panicking made her an example to all officers. She remained firm but compassionate, aware that discipline and self-control were essential in her profession. For Jason, the memory of that day would remain etched in his mind forever. But rather than remain a prisoner of shame, he embraced it as a life lesson. He understood that a single mistake, a thoughtless act, could destroy everything. And above all, he learned that accepting one's mistakes and getting back up after the fall was the only way to rebuild. Life resumed its course, different but full of new opportunities. Jason Turner, once a symbol of impulsiveness and anger, became an example of slow but real redemption. And Samantha Whitmore, always respected and exemplary, continued to show that self-control and professionalism can transform a critical situation into a lasting lesson for all. The city of Charleston would remember this incident not only as a dramatic shock, but also as a story of lessons learned, responsibilities assumed, and lives transformed by a moment when everything could have changed forever.